The blizzard hit with a fury that would trap them both in a moment neither could have imagined. And when Lila Reynolds felt the first sharp contraction tear through her body at the mountain cabin, she knew her husband would not make it back in time. The snow had been falling steadily for 3 days now, December of 1884, bringing with it the worst winter storms Idaho had seen in a generation. And she stood at the frosted window watching the white curtain descend over the mountains with growing dread. Her hands pressed against the swell of her belly, feeling the tightness that had been building all morning, and she whispered a prayer into the cold air that somehow, someway, help would find her before the baby came. She had not wanted to come to this remote cabin so late in her pregnancy, but her husband James had insisted they needed to check on the cattle, herd they kept in the high country pastures before the worst of winter set in. They were supposed to stay only 2 nights, inspect the fences and shelters, then return to their home in Twin Falls, Idaho before the December storms arrived. But nature had other plans, and the snow began falling their second evening there. Soft flakes at first that seemed almost peaceful, then building into something fierce and relentless. James had left that morning, determined to reach town and bring back the doctor, promising he would return before nightfall. That was 8 hours ago, and Lila knew in her heart that he would not make it. The snow was too deep now, the roads impassable, and she was utterly alone. Another contraction seized her, stronger this time, and she gripped the windowsill until her knuckles turned white. She was 22 years old, 8.5 months pregnant with her first child, and terrified beyond measure. The cabin was well stocked with provisions, the fireplace blazing with warmth, but what good was any of that when she had no idea how to deliver her own baby? Her mother had died when she was young, taken by fever, and she had no sisters to guide her through the mysteries of childbirth. She knew only what other women had whispered to her, vague warnings about pain and blood, and the very real possibility that women died bringing life into the world. The wind howled against the cabin walls, rattling the shutters, and Lila forced herself to breathe slowly. She could not panic, not now. She moved away from the window and began gathering what supplies she thought she might need, clean linens from the chest, a sharp knife that she held in trembling hands before setting it near the bed, water heating in the kettle over the fire. Her movements were mechanical, driven by instinct rather than knowledge, and she kept glancing toward the door as though sheer willpower could make James materialize through the storm. Hours passed. The light outside faded to a murky gray twilight, then to the deep purple-black of night. The contractions grew closer together, each wave of pain stealing her breath and leaving her gasping. She had taken to pacing the small cabin, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other clutching her belly, murmuring soothing words to the child within as though the baby could hear her fear and needed comfort. The fire cast dancing shadows on the log walls, and the only sounds were the crackling wood, the howling wind, and her own labored breathing. It was near midnight when she heard something that was not the wind. A sound outside, muffled but distinct. Hoofbeats. Her heart leaped with desperate hope. James had made it back, or perhaps he had sent someone, and she would not face this alone after all. She stumbled to the door and pulled it open, gasping as the cold wind hit her face and snow swirled into the cabin. Through the white darkness, a figure emerged on horseback, a man hunched against the storm. But even from a distance, Lila could tell it was not James. This man was taller, broader, and he rode a dappled gray horse that looked nearly spectral in the blizzard. He dismounted quickly when he saw her standing in the doorway, leading his horse toward the small lean-to stable beside the cabin. "Get inside," he called out, his voice deep and commanding even over the wind. You will freeze standing there." Lila retreated into the cabin, leaving the door ajar, and watched as the stranger quickly tended to his horse with efficient movements born of long practice. Within minutes, he was striding toward the cabin, snow clinging to his heavy coat and the wide brim of his hat. He stepped inside and pushed the door shut behind him, cutting off the howling wind, and turned to face her fully for the first time. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years spent in the mountains. Dark hair fell to his collar, wet with melting snow, and his eyes were a startling pale blue that seemed to take in everything at once. His jaw was strong, covered with several days' worth of dark stubble, and there was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that gave him a dangerous look. But it was his hands that caught her attention as he removed his gloves, large, capable hands with long fingers, the hands of someone who worked hard and knew how to fix things. "Madam," he said, removing his hat and nodding respectfully. "Name is Isaac Crawford. I have been riding the high trails checking the line shacks for stranded folks. The storm caught a lot of people unprepared." His eyes moved to her swollen belly, then back to her face, and she saw understanding dawn there. "You are alone here." Another contraction hit, and Lila could not answer, could only bend forward with a small cry of pain, clutching at the back of a wooden chair. In an instant, Isaac was beside her, his hand steadying her elbow, his voice calm and low. "How long have you been in labor?" "Since morning," she managed to gasp out as the pain subsided. "My husband went for the doctor, but he cannot get back through the snow. Nobody can. The roads are blocked for 40 miles in every direction." Isaac's expression remained steady, though she saw something flicker in those pale eyes, perhaps concern or calculation. "Then we will manage without a doctor. Have you got lanterns? We will need good light." "You have done this before." Hope surged through her words. "Helped birth more calves and foals than I can count," he said, already moving to assess the cabin, locating the lanterns on the shelf and checking their oil levels. "Delivered a few human babies too when necessity called for it. My mother was a midwife before she passed, and I learned what I could from watching her work. It is not so different when you understand the basics." He spoke with such calm authority that Lila felt some of her panic receding. This mountain cowboy, this stranger who had materialized out of the storm like an answer to prayer, moved through her cabin with quiet confidence. He lit 3 lanterns and positioned them strategically, washing the room in warm, golden light. He washed his hands thoroughly in the basin, scrubbing with the harsh lye soap, then rolled up his sleeves. "What is your name?" he asked as he worked. "Lila Reynolds." "Well, Lila Reynolds, I need you to tell me exactly how you are feeling, and I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She looked into those steady blue eyes and found herself nodding. "I can try." That is all anyone can ask. He helped her to the bed, which she had already prepared with clean sheets. "How far apart are the pains now?" "Maybe 5 minutes, sometimes less." Isaac nodded, his expression thoughtful. He examined her with clinical efficiency, his touch gentle but sure, and Lila felt embarrassment wash through her despite the circumstances. He seemed to sense her discomfort and kept his eyes on her face rather than anything else. "The baby is coming soon," he said after a moment. "Your body is doing what it should. That is good. Have you felt the baby move today?" "Yes, quite a lot actually, like the little one knows something is happening." A brief smile crossed Isaac's weathered face. "They know, babies always know." He moved to stoke the fire higher, keeping the cabin warm. "I am going to be honest with you, Lila. This is going to hurt worse than anything you have felt so far, but your body was made for this. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time, in caves and tents and places far worse than this warm cabin. You are strong, I can see that, and you will get through this." His words steadied her more than any false reassurance could have. She appreciated that he did not lie to her or try to minimize what was coming. Another contraction built, and she gripped the bed frame, breathing through it as Isaac watched her with measuring eyes. "Good," he said when it passed. "You are doing well." The night stretched into something surreal, time losing all meaning as Lila's world narrowed to waves of pain, the low encouragement of Isaac's voice, and the golden glow of lantern light. He never left her side, alternating between checking her progress and keeping her as comfortable as possible. He brought her water when her mouth went dry, pressed a cool cloth to her forehead when she began to sweat despite the winter cold outside, and held her hand when the contractions became so intense she thought she might break apart. "Tell me about your husband," Isaac said during one of the brief respites between pains, clearly trying to keep her mind occupied. "How did you meet?" Lila took a shaky breath. "At a dance in Twin Falls 2 years ago. He worked at the feed store then, had just moved to Idaho from Illinois. He asked me to dance 3 times that night, and I said yes every time even though my friends teased me about it." The memory brought a small smile to her lips. "He is a good man, kind and hardworking. He saved everything to buy our small ranch, wanted to build something for our family." "He will be devastated that he could not be here for this," Isaac observed quietly. "I know, but he will be grateful that you are." She looked at the mountain cowboy, this stranger who was helping her through the most vulnerable moment of her life. "Where do you come from, Isaac Crawford? What brings you to these mountains?" He was quiet for a moment, adjusting one of the lanterns to cast better light. "I have a cabin about 8 miles north of here, up in the high country. I run cattle in the summer, trap in the winter, and mostly keep to myself. The mountains suit me better than towns ever did." "Why is that?" Isaac's expression grew distant. "I was married once, years ago. She died of pneumonia our first winter together. I could not seem to find my place in the world after that, so I came up here where the silence made sense." He met her eyes. "But I check on folks during bad storms. My wife always said the mountains could be cruel, and anyone who lived here had to look after each other. I figure she was right about that." Lila felt a surge of sympathy for this man who had clearly known his own grief and loss. "I am sorry about your wife. It was a long time ago." But the shadows in his eyes said the pain was not entirely gone. "You focus on what is happening now. The past can wait." The contractions intensified as the night wore on, coming faster and harder until Lila could barely catch her breath between them. Isaac remained utterly calm, his presence solid and reassuring. He had delivered babies before, but Lila suspected it had been animals far more often than humans, yet his confidence never wavered. He knew when to encourage her to push and when to tell her to breathe through the pain. He knew how to check the baby's position and monitor her progress. He knew exactly what to do, and his steady competence gave her strength she did not know she possessed. "The head is crowning," Isaac said, his voice tight with concentration. "Just a little more, Lila. You are almost there." The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, a white-hot agony that consumed her entire being. But she pushed with everything she had, crying out in the lantern-lit cabin while the blizzard raged outside, and this mountain stranger guided her baby into the world with strong, gentle hands. And then, suddenly, release. The sharp, outraged wail of a newborn filled the cabin, and Lila collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief and overwhelming emotion. Through her tears, she saw Isaac working quickly, cleaning the baby's face, making sure the tiny lungs were clear. And then he was wrapping the squalling infant in a clean towel and placing the bundle in her arms. "You have a son," Isaac said, and his voice was rough with emotion. A healthy baby boy. Lila looked down at her child for the first time, at the red, wrinkled face and the tiny fists waving in protest at this cold new world, and felt love crash through her with stunning force. Her son. Her baby. She touched his downy head with trembling fingers and marveled at the perfection of him, the reality that he was here, alive, whole. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Hello, sweet boy." Isaac worked efficiently to finish the delivery, tending to everything that needed to be done with the same calm competence he had shown throughout the night. When he was satisfied that both mother and baby were stable, he cleaned up the cabin and washed his hands again, giving Lila privacy to hold her son and begin to nurse him. The baby latched on with surprising strength, and Lila felt tears streaming down her face again. She looked up to see Isaac standing by the fireplace, his back to her, staring into the flames. The set of his shoulders suggested deep emotion held carefully in check. "Isaac," she said softly, "thank you. You saved us both tonight." He turned to face her, and in the lantern light she saw that his eyes were bright. "You did the hard part, I just helped. You did far more than that, and you know it." She looked down at her son, then back at the mountain cowboy. "Will you stay until morning at least?" "The storm is still too dangerous for travel." Isaac nodded slowly. "I will stay, and I will ride down to Twin Falls as soon as the weather clears to let your husband know that you and the baby are safe. He must be out of his mind with worry. He will want to thank you himself." "No thanks are needed." Isaac moved to add more wood to the fire. "I will sleep here by the hearth. You rest now. You have earned it." Lila wanted to say more, wanted to express the depth of her gratitude, but exhaustion was pulling her under like a tide. Her son had fallen asleep at her breast, his tiny face peaceful, and she carefully adjusted the blankets around them both. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Isaac settling down on the floor near the fireplace, his long frame outlined in the golden glow, keeping watch over them through what remained of the winter night. She woke to the smell of coffee and the pale gray light of dawn seeping through the cabin windows. Her body ached in ways she had never experienced, tender and sore. But when she looked down and saw her son sleeping peacefully in the crook of her arm, the discomfort seemed insignificant. He was here. He was perfect. They had survived the night. Isaac was at the stove, pouring coffee into tin cups, and he turned when he heard her stirring. His dark hair was mussed from sleep, and the stubble on his jaw had grown thicker, but his eyes were alert and assessing as he took in her condition. "How are you feeling?" he asked, bringing her a cup of water since she could not drink coffee while nursing. "Sore, exhausted, grateful." She smiled tiredly. "The baby has been sleeping well." "That is good. He had a rough entry into the world." Isaac pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, his movements careful as though he did not want to intrude on her space. "The snow has stopped, but the drifts outside are higher than my horse's chest in places. It will take time to dig out and make the roads passable again." Lila felt a flutter of worry. "Then James still cannot get back." "Not easily, no, but I can make it on horseback if I am careful. The trails I know are less exposed than the main roads. I will head out after you have eaten, and I am sure you are stable enough to be left for a few hours. I hate for you to risk the journey. Your husband deserves to know that his wife and son are alive and well." Isaac's expression was firm. "Besides, I have ridden through worse storms than this. The mountains may be harsh, but I know their moods. They fell into a comfortable routine over the next few hours." Isaac proved surprisingly adept at caring for both mother and newborn, helping Lila when she needed to move, making sure she drank plenty of water and ate the simple breakfast he prepared. He handled the baby with careful confidence when Lila needed to tend to her own needs, cradling the tiny boy with those large, capable hands, as though he had done it 100 times before. "You are very good with him," Lila observed as she watched Isaac rock her son gently near the fire. "I always wanted children," Isaac admitted quietly, his eyes on the baby's face. "That was the plan before my wife died, a whole house full of them." He paused, then added, "Life does not always go the way we plan. No, it does not." Lila studied him carefully, this mountain man who had appeared when she needed him most. There was something deeply good about Isaac Crawford, something solid and true that went beyond his skills and competence. He was lonely, she realized, choosing isolation in these mountains because connection with others brought the risk of more loss and pain. By mid-morning, Isaac had saddled his horse and prepared to leave for Twin Falls. He checked on Lila and the baby one final time, making sure the fire was well stoked and that she had everything she needed within reach. "If anything seems wrong, anything at all, you fire 3 shots from the rifle by the door," he instructed. "Sound carries in these mountains. Someone will hear and come." "We will be fine," Lila assured him, "but please be careful, and tell James that his son is beautiful and perfect." Isaac nodded, settling his hat on his head. "I will be back as soon as I can with your husband if the roads allow it." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "You were very brave last night, Lila, only because you were here." He gave her a small smile, then stepped out into the brilliant white world beyond the cabin. Lila heard his horse's hooves crunching through the deep snow, the sound fading gradually, and then she was alone with her son in the quiet aftermath of the storm. She spent the hours caring for the baby, marveling at every tiny detail of him. She counted his fingers and toes, studied the curve of his ears, watched the expressions that flickered across his sleeping face. She tried to imagine what James would say when he first held his son, the joy and relief that would flood through him. She thought about Isaac Crawford riding through the dangerous mountain passes to bring her husband home, and felt a deep gratitude that made her chest ache. The afternoon was fading when she heard hoofbeats again, multiple horses this time. She moved carefully to the window and saw 4 riders approaching through the snow. Isaac was in the lead on his gray horse, and behind him came James on their bay gelding, followed by 2 other men she recognized as neighbors from Twin Falls. Her heart surged with relief and joy at the sight of her husband. James practically fell from his horse in his haste to reach the cabin, and then he was through the door, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry, his eyes wild as they found her sitting on the bed with their son in her arms. "Lila," he choked out, crossing the room in 3 strides. "Oh God, Lila, I thought I had lost you both." "We are fine," she assured him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "James, meet your son." Her husband sank to his knees beside the bed, staring at the baby with an expression of wonder and disbelief. He reached out tentatively, touching the infant's tiny hand, and when the baby's fingers curled reflexively around his father's larger one, James broke down completely, sobbing with relief. "I tried to get back," he said through his tears. "I tried so hard, but the snow was too deep, the roads completely blocked. I made it to town and got the doctor, but we could not get through. I thought you were here alone. I thought Isaac found me," Lila interrupted gently. "He delivered the baby and took care of us both. We would not have survived without him." James turned to look at the mountain cowboy, who had entered the cabin quietly behind him and was now standing near the door looking distinctly uncomfortable with the emotional scene unfolding. The 2 neighbors remained outside, tending to the horses and giving the family privacy. "You delivered my son?" James asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sir," Isaac said simply. James stood and crossed to him, and before Isaac could react, pulled the taller man into a fierce embrace. "Thank you," James said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for saving my family. I do not know how I can ever repay you." Isaac looked distinctly uncomfortable with the gratitude, carefully extricating himself from the embrace. No repayment needed. Anyone would have done the same. "No," James said firmly. "Not anyone could have done what you did. You are a hero, Isaac Crawford, whether you want to admit it or not." The two neighbors came inside then, offering their congratulations and marveling at the healthy baby. They had brought supplies from town, extra food and blankets and medicine. Everything the doctor had sent once he realized he could not make the journey himself. The cabin filled with friendly voices and good-natured celebration, but Lila noticed that Isaac remained quiet and withdrawn, staying near the periphery of the group. As evening fell, the neighbors prepared to ride back to Twin Falls, wanting to return before full dark. James asked them to spread the word that his wife and son were safe and healthy. He offered to pay Isaac handsomely for his help, but the mountain cowboy refused firmly. "I will not take money for doing what was right," Isaac said, his tone allowing no argument. "I am just glad they are both well." After the neighbors left, James and Lila convinced Isaac to stay the night again rather than attempt the ride back to his own cabin in the dark. They shared a simple supper, and Lila watched the two men slowly become more comfortable with each other. James was a gentle, talkative man, eager to hear every detail of the previous night's events. Isaac answered his questions with characteristic brevity, downplaying his own role, but Lila could see the relief and gratitude shining in her husband's eyes with every word. That night, lying in bed with James's arm around her, and their son sleeping in the small cradle James had quickly fashioned from a wooden crate and spare blankets, Lila felt overwhelmingly blessed. They had survived what could have been a tragedy. Their family was whole. And they owed it all to a lonely mountain cowboy who asked for nothing in return. In the morning, Isaac prepared to leave for his own cabin. James insisted on giving him supplies at least, loading his saddlebags with coffee and flour and jerky. The two men shook hands with real warmth, and James made Isaac promise to visit them in Twin Falls once they returned home. "Our door is always open to you," James said earnestly. "You are family now, whether you like it or not." Isaac nodded, clearly moved though he tried to hide it. Then he turned to Lila, who stood in the cabin doorway wrapped in a heavy shawl, the baby in her arms. "Take care of yourself and that boy," Isaac said. "He is a fighter. He came into this world during a blizzard on a mountain. That means he will be strong." "Thanks to you," Lila said softly. "I meant what James said. You will always be welcome in our home, Isaac. You are part of our family now." Something flickered in those pale blue eyes, some deep emotion carefully controlled. "You take care," he said again, then mounted his gray horse and rode away into the winter morning, becoming a dark figure against the white landscape, then disappearing entirely into the pine forests that climbed the mountain slopes. Over the next few days, the weather cleared enough for James, Lila, and the baby to make the careful journey back to Twin Falls. The whole town celebrated the miracle of the blizzard baby, as people began calling him, and everyone wanted to hear the story of the mountain cowboy, who had appeared out of the storm like a guardian angel. Lila told the tale until she grew tired of repeating it, but she never grew tired of remembering that night, the quiet strength of Isaac Crawford, the way he had kept her alive with his competence and his calm words. They named their son Thomas James Reynolds, but Lila insisted that Isaac be his middle name as well. Thomas Isaac James Reynolds, a name that honored both his father and the man who had brought him safely into the world. James agreed without hesitation, saying it was the least they could do. The weeks turned into months. Winter gradually loosened its grip on Idaho, the snow melting in the valleys though it still crowned the high peaks. Lila recovered from the birth, marveling daily at how her son grew and changed. Thomas was an easy baby, quick to smile, and she often thought about what Isaac had said, that he would be strong because he was born in a blizzard on a mountain. But Isaac did not come to visit despite their repeated invitations. James rode up to the mountain cabin twice, bringing supplies and gifts and messages of gratitude, but each time he reported that Isaac was polite but distant, thanking them for their kindness, but making it clear he preferred his solitude. Lila felt sad about that, wishing the mountain cowboy would allow himself to be part of the family he had helped create. She suspected he was afraid of getting too close, afraid of caring too much after having lost his own wife and the future he had planned. Spring arrived properly in April, turning the valley green and filling the air with the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. Lila was in town one morning, shopping for fabric to make new clothes for Thomas, who seemed to outgrow everything within weeks. She was standing at the general store counter when she heard a commotion outside, raised voices that carried an edge of alarm. She hurried to the door with several other customers and saw a crowd gathering in the street. Two men were supporting a third between them, half carrying him toward the doctor's office. Even from a distance, Lila could see the injured man was bleeding, his clothes torn and dirty. As they drew closer, her heart stopped. It was Isaac. Without thinking, she ran into the street, intercepting them before they reached the doctor's door. Isaac's face was pale, his left arm wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage, and there was a deep cut above his right eye that was still bleeding sluggishly. "What happened?" she demanded. One of the men supporting him, a rancher named Tom Burke, answered grimly. "We found him on the North Trail. Looks like his horse threw him on the rocks. The animal came back to his cabin without him, and we went searching. He has been out there for hours." Isaac's eyes found hers, and she saw pain and something else in them, perhaps shame that she was seeing him like this. "I am fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Just some cuts and a broken arm." "You are not fine at all," Lila said sharply. "Get him inside now." The doctor, an elderly man named Harold Pritchett, who had delivered half the babies in Twin Falls and set countless broken bones, took charge quickly. He ushered Isaac into the examination room while Lila waited outside with a dozen other concerned townspeople. Word spread quickly through Twin Falls that the mountain cowboy who had delivered the Reynolds baby was hurt, and soon it seemed half the town was crowded into and around the doctor's office. James arrived from their ranch, having heard the news, and found Lila pacing in the waiting area. "How bad is it?" he asked. "I do not know yet. The doctor is still with him." Lila twisted her hands together anxiously. "He looked terrible, James, so pale and hurt." They waited together until Dr. Pritchett emerged nearly an hour later, wiping his hands on a towel. "The arm is definitely broken, a clean break at least. He also has a nasty concussion, multiple cuts and bruises, and he is severely dehydrated. He must have been lying out there for quite some time before Burke found him." "Can we see him?" Lila asked. "He is resting now." "I gave him laudanum for the pain." The doctor paused, then added, "He will need someone to look after him for the next few weeks while that arm heals. He certainly cannot go back to his cabin alone in the mountains. Does he have family in the area?" "No family that we know of," James said, then looked at Lila. They had the same thought simultaneously. "He will come stay with us." "I am not sure he will agree to that," Dr. Pritchett said doubtfully. "He strikes me as a stubborn, independent sort." "He does not have a choice," Lila said firmly. "He saved my life and my son's life. Now it is our turn to help him, whether he wants it or not." When they were finally allowed into the examination room, they found Isaac awake but groggy, his left arm in a fresh splint and sling, the cut above his eye neatly stitched. He looked exhausted and in pain despite the laudanum, and when he saw them his expression was resigned. "I know what you are about to say," he began. "Good, then you will not argue with us," Lila interrupted. "You are coming to stay at our ranch until that arm heals. We have a spare room and I am a good nurse. You will be comfortable and well cared for. I cannot impose on you like that." "You are not imposing, we are insisting," James said firmly. "You gave us our son, Isaac. Let us give you a place to heal." Isaac opened his mouth to argue further, but Lila cut him off with a look that brooked no disagreement. "You have no choice in this matter. We are taking you home with us, and that is final." Despite his protests, Isaac was too weak and in too much pain to truly resist. James arranged for a wagon to transport him to their ranch, and by that evening, Isaac found himself installed in the small guest bedroom off the main house. A clean nightshirt replacing his torn and bloody clothes, his broken arm immobilized and aching despite the medicine. Lila proved to be every bit as competent a nurse as she had promised. She checked on him regularly, bringing him food and water and fresh bandages for his cuts. She kept his room clean and comfortable, opening the window to let in the spring breeze and sunshine. She read to him when he seemed restless, and sat quietly nearby when he just needed company without conversation. In those first days, Isaac remained withdrawn and uncomfortable with the situation, clearly unaccustomed to being cared for or accepting help. But gradually, as his strength returned and the pain eased, he began to relax slightly. He would sit up in bed and play with little Thomas when Lila brought the baby to visit, making silly faces that sent the infant into delighted giggles. He would tell James stories about the mountains and wildlife when her husband came to keep him company in the evenings. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, Lila would hear him moving around his room, restless and struggling with being confined after years of freedom in the high country. 2 weeks passed. Isaac's cuts healed cleanly, the stitches were removed, and the swelling around his arm subsided. He was allowed to get up and move around the house, though Dr. Pritchett was firm that the arm needed at least another month in the splint before it would be healed enough for hard work. Being up and mobile put Isaac in closer contact with the daily life of the Reynolds household, and Lila found herself increasingly aware of his presence. She noticed small things about him that she had not had time to observe during the dramatic night of Thomas's birth. The way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, like someone utterly comfortable in his own body. The gentle patience he showed with the baby, his voice softening to something almost tender when he spoke to the child. The rare smiles that transformed his weathered face, making him look years younger. The intelligence in those pale blue eyes that suggested he was far more educated and thoughtful than his rough appearance might indicate. She caught herself watching him sometimes and felt a flutter of something she could not quite name. It was not attraction, she told herself firmly. She was a married woman who loved her husband deeply. But there was something about Isaac Crawford that drew her attention, some quality of quiet strength and integrity that she found deeply compelling. May arrived, bringing warmer weather and longer days. Isaac insisted on making himself useful around the ranch despite his injury, helping James with tasks that required only one hand. He fixed broken fencing using his ingenuity to work around the splint, organized the chaotic storage barn, and even began teaching James some of the tracking and wilderness skills he had learned from years in the mountains. The two men developed a genuine friendship, and Lila often heard them talking and laughing together as they worked. One afternoon, Lila was hanging laundry in the yard with Thomas sleeping in a basket at her feet when she heard a strange sound from the barn. It was muffled but distinct, and it took her a moment to recognize it. Someone was crying. She picked up the baby basket and moved quietly toward the barn, not wanting to intrude but concerned. Through the open door she could see Isaac sitting on a hay bale, his head in his good hand, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sight struck her heart with unexpected force. This strong, stoic man who had delivered her baby with such competence, who had survived alone in the mountains for years, was breaking down in private where he thought no one would see. Lila set the basket down outside and approached slowly. "Isaac." He looked up quickly, clearly mortified that she had caught him in this vulnerable moment. He wiped roughly at his eyes with his good hand. "I am sorry. I did not mean for you to see that." "What is wrong?" she asked gently, sitting down on the hay bale beside him. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, staring at his boots. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Being here with you and James and Thomas, seeing what a real family looks like, it makes me remember everything I lost. My wife and I, we were going to have this. A home, children, a life together. And then she died and it all just disappeared, and I ran to the mountains because I could not bear to watch other people have what I wanted so badly." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of pain. "You have been nothing but kind to me, and I am grateful, but every day here reminds me of what I will never have." Lila's throat tightened with sympathy. "You could have it, Isaac. You could have a family, a home. You just have to give yourself permission to try again." "I cannot." He shook his head. "What if I let myself care and lose everything again? I do not think I could survive that a second time." "So you would rather be alone forever than risk being hurt?" She reached out and touched his good hand carefully. "That is not living, Isaac. That is just existing." He looked down at her hand on his, and something shifted in his expression. "How did you become so wise?" "I am not wise. I just know that life is precious and short, and we should not waste the time we have been given." She squeezed his hand gently. "You gave me and my son life, Isaac. I want you to have a life too, a real one, not just solitude in the mountains." They sat together in the quiet barn, and Lila felt something change between them, some barrier falling away. She realized that she cared about this man deeply, not romantically but as a dear friend, and she wanted him to find happiness. She wanted him to heal not just his broken arm but his broken heart. That evening at dinner, James announced that he had an idea. "You know the Peterson place, about 2 miles west of here? The old couple who owned it moved back east to live with their daughter. The property has been sitting empty for months." "What about it?" Isaac asked. "It is a good piece of land, about 40 acres with a solid house and barn. Small but well built. I was thinking you might want to buy it." James leaned forward. "You could have your own place but be close enough to town and to us. You would not have to choose between isolation and community. You could have both." Isaac looked startled. "I do not know anything about farming or running a ranch that small." "I can teach you," James said. "And you already know more about horses and cattle than most folks. You could make a good life there, Isaac." "I do not have the money for a down payment on land." James waved that away. "I talked to the bank. They are willing to work with you on terms, especially once I told them how you saved my wife and son. The whole town thinks you are a hero. You would have plenty of support." Lila watched Isaac's face as he processed this, saw hope and fear and longing warring in his expression. "You should think about it," she urged. "You deserve a home, Isaac. A real home, not just a cabin in the high country." Over the next few days, Isaac did think about it. He rode out with James to look at the Peterson property, and when he came back, Lila could see the wonder in his eyes. He had fallen in love with the place. she realized. The possibility of putting down real roots was taking hold in his heart, though he was clearly terrified to reach for it. Finally, one evening in late May, Isaac announced his decision. "I am going to buy the Peterson place," he said, his voice tentative as though he still could not quite believe he was saying the words. "If the bank will truly give me the terms I want to try." Lila felt tears of happiness spring to her eyes, and James clapped Isaac on the back with genuine joy. "That is wonderful news. You will be our neighbor, practically. Thomas will grow up knowing you, learning from you." The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. The bank approved Isaac's loan, thanks largely to James's strong recommendation and the goodwill Isaac had earned throughout Twin Falls. The property changed hands, and Isaac officially became a landowner for the first time in his life. His broken arm had healed enough to remove the splint finally, though it would be weak for some time yet, and he began the work of making the old Peterson place his own. James helped him fix up the house, which needed a new roof and fresh whitewash on the walls. Lila contributed curtains and linens and dishes, insisting that a proper home needed proper furnishings. Other neighbors stopped by to lend a hand, bringing housewarming gifts and offering advice. Isaac seemed overwhelmed by all the attention and generosity, still not quite comfortable being the center of so much positive regard, but Lila could see him slowly relaxing into the community. It was a warm afternoon in June when Lila brought Thomas to visit Isaac's new home for the first time. She wanted to see what he had done with the place, and also to bring him a pie she had baked as a housewarming gift. She arrived to find Isaac in the yard, working on reinforcing the corral fence, and he looked up with a smile when he heard her wagon approach. "Welcome to my humble ranch," he said, coming over to help her down. He reached for Thomas, who immediately grabbed at Isaac's face with chubby baby hands, gurgling happily. "It looks wonderful, Isaac," Lila said, surveying the tidy yard and freshly painted house. "You have done so much work." "Still a lot more to do, but it is coming together." He carried Thomas into the house, and Lila followed, curious to see what he had done with the interior. The main room was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and Lila's cheerful curtains brightening the windows. Isaac had built proper shelves and cabinets, displaying a competence with woodworking she had not seen before. Everything was neat and organized, which did not surprise her. She had learned over the past months that Isaac was meticulous about his work and his surroundings. "You have made it a real home," she said warmly. "I am trying." Isaac set Thomas down in the middle of a blanket on the floor, where the baby immediately began trying to crawl, rocking back and forth on his hands and knees. "It feels strange, owning something, having a permanent place." But good strange. They sat together at his small kitchen table, drinking coffee and talking while Thomas played. Lila told him the latest town gossip, and Isaac shared his plans for the ranch, ideas for crops and livestock, his voice growing more animated as he talked about the future. It struck her how much he had changed since that snowy night 7 months ago. He was still quiet and reserved by nature, but the deep loneliness that had haunted his eyes was fading, replaced by something that looked like contentment. As she prepared to leave, Thomas now drowsy on her shoulder, Isaac walked her out to the wagon. "Thank you for all your help," he said sincerely. "I would not have any of this without you and James." "You would have found your way eventually," Lila said, "but I am glad we could be part of it." She paused, then added softly, "You deserve happiness, Isaac. I hope you know that now." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw a depth of emotion in those pale blue eyes that made her breath catch. "I am starting to believe it," he said quietly. "Because of you and your family, I am starting to believe I can have a life again." Summer settled over Idaho, bringing long golden days and warm nights filled with cricket song. Isaac's ranch began to take shape as he put his efforts into the land. He bought a small herd of cattle, a few good horses, and planted crops in the fields that had lain fallow for the past year. He worked from dawn to dusk, building the life he had never thought he would have again. And every evening he would sit on his porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains, feeling something like peace. The Reynolds family visited often, and Isaac found himself going to town more frequently than he ever had before. He attended church on Sundays, something he had not done since his wife died, and stood awkwardly in the fellowship hall afterward while friendly people welcomed him and asked about his ranch. He went to barn dances and community gatherings, events he would have avoided like plague before, and found himself almost enjoying the company and conversation. But there was a complication he had not anticipated, one that grew more troublesome with each passing week. He was developing feelings for Lila Reynolds. He had not meant for it to happen. She was married, the wife of his closest friend, the mother of the child he had helped bring into the world. She should have been completely off limits in every possible way. But Isaac found himself thinking about her constantly, remembering the sound of her laugh, the way she tilted her head when she was listening intently, the warmth in her dark eyes when she looked at her son. He remembered the night he had delivered Thomas, the incredible courage and strength she had shown, and he felt a connection to her that went beyond gratitude or friendship. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong, and he tried desperately to suppress the feelings. He threw himself into his work, exhausting himself physically in the hopes it would quiet his mind. He avoided being alone with Lila, always making sure James or others were present when they interacted. He considered moving back to the mountains, running away again to the isolation that had protected him for so long. But he could not seem to make himself leave. It was late July when everything came to a head. Lila had come to Isaac's ranch to bring him fresh bread and to check on a young calf that had been sick. James was away in Boise on business, gone for a week to sell cattle and purchase supplies, and would not return for several days yet. Thomas had stayed with Lila's cousin in town, so she could manage the visit more easily. They checked on the calf together, which was recovering well. And then Lila insisted on helping Isaac prepare dinner since it was getting late, and she had a long ride back to her own ranch. They worked companionably in the small kitchen, and Isaac was achingly aware of her presence beside him, the accidental brush of her hand against his as they moved around each other. "You have settled in so well here," Lila said as they sat down to eat. "I am proud of you, Isaac. You have built something real." "I would not have done it without your encouragement," he said honestly. "You and James pushed me to take the chance." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, but Isaac could feel tension building in the air, something unspoken pressing between them. Finally, he could not hold it in any longer. "Lila, I need to tell you something," he said, setting down his fork. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to continue. "And then I think we need to have some distance from each other." She looked at him with concern. "What is wrong?" "I have feelings for you," Isaac said bluntly. "Feelings that are completely inappropriate given that you are married to my best friend. I have tried to ignore them, tried to make them go away, but they will not leave me alone. And I cannot keep spending time with you pretending everything is fine when it is not." Lila's eyes widened with surprise, and Isaac hurried on before he lost his nerve. "I want you to know that I would never act on these feelings, never try to come between you and James. You have a good marriage, a beautiful family, and I respect that completely. But I am not a good enough man to keep seeing you regularly and not want more, so I think it is best if we keep our distance. You and James can still visit, of course, but maybe I should not come around your place as often, and we should make sure we are not alone together." There was a long, terrible silence. Lila's face had gone pale, and she was staring at him with an expression he could not read. Isaac felt sick, certain he had just destroyed the friendship that meant everything to him, but at least he had been honest. "Isaac," Lila said finally, her voice shaking slightly, "I need to be honest with you too." She took a deep breath. "I have feelings for you as well." Isaac felt his world tilt. "What? Not the way you are thinking," she said quickly. "Not romantic feelings exactly, but something strong and confusing that I do not entirely understand. You saved my life and Thomas's life. You delivered my son with your own hands. There is a bond between us because of that, something deep that feels more intense than normal friendship." She looked down at her hands. "I care about you tremendously, Isaac. I want you to be happy. I think about you often. And sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had met you before James, if circumstances had been different." "Lila." Isaac's voice was hoarse. "But I love my husband," she continued firmly, meeting his eyes again. "I love James with my whole heart. He is a good man, a wonderful father, and my true partner in life. What I feel for you does not diminish that. It exists beside it, something separate." She paused. "I think what we both need to understand is that it is possible to care deeply for more than one person, to have different kinds of love. I love James as my husband. I love Thomas as my son. And I love you as the man who gave me both of them, as a dear friend, as someone who will always be special to me. That is not wrong, Isaac. That is just human." Isaac felt tears burning behind his eyes. "But how do we manage it? How do I spend time with you without wanting something I can never have?" "The same way I do," Lila said gently. "By remembering what is most important. My marriage, my family, your friendship with James. By choosing to honor those things above our own complicated feelings." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I do not want to lose you from my life, Isaac. Thomas needs you. James needs you. I need you. But as a friend, as an uncle to my son, as a brother in all but blood. Can you accept that?" Isaac looked down at her small hand holding his larger one and felt something settle inside him. She was right. What he felt for her was complicated. Layers of gratitude and connection and admiration and affection all tangled together. But at its core was friendship, deep and true. The romantic attraction would fade with time if he did not feed it. What would remain was something more valuable and lasting. "I can accept that," he said quietly. "I want to be part of your family, part of Thomas's life. That means more to me than any fantasy about things being different." Lila squeezed his hand, relief evident on her face. "Then we understand each other. We can be honest about these feelings without letting them control us, and we can continue being the family we have become." They talked long into the evening, working through the complicated emotions until both felt more at peace. It helped immensely to have everything out in the open, to acknowledge the bond between them while also affirming the boundaries that needed to remain. By the time Lila finally left to ride home in the twilight, Isaac felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When James returned from Boys a few days later, both Isaac and Lila told him about the conversation they had shared. James listened thoughtfully, showing no anger or jealousy, and finally said, "I appreciate you both being honest, and I understand what you mean about complicated feelings. I feel a similar bond with you, Isaac. You are like a brother to me. We went through something extraordinary together that night of the blizzard, and that created connections that are deeper than normal friendship. I trust you both completely, and I am glad you talked this through." With everything in the open and boundaries clearly established, the three of them found a new equilibrium. Isaac continued to be a regular presence in the Reynolds family's life, but with a clearer understanding of his role. He was uncle, brother, dear friend, but never a threat to the marriage or family structure. And as the months passed, the romantic aspect of his feelings for Lila did indeed fade, leaving behind a deep familial love that was entirely appropriate and comfortable for all of them. The years began to pass. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, learning to walk and talk and explore his world with fearless enthusiasm. True to Isaac's prediction, he was a strong and adventurous child, always getting into scrapes and keeping his parents on their toes. He adored Uncle Isaac and would cry whenever it was time to leave the neighboring ranch. Isaac's property flourished. He proved to have a natural talent for ranching, and his cattle herd grew steadily. He hired a young hand to help with the work, a 19-year-old named Billy who reminded Isaac of himself at that age, eager and hardworking but rough around the edges. Isaac enjoyed teaching the boy, passing on the skills he had learned from years in the mountains. The Reynolds ranch prospered as well. James expanded their operation, buying adjacent land and increasing their herd. Lila became known throughout Twin Falls for her garden, which produced the most abundant vegetables and flowers anyone had ever seen, and for her kindness to neighbors in need. She was always the first to arrive when someone was sick or struggling, bringing food and helping hands. In the spring of 1887, nearly 3 years after Thomas's dramatic birth, Lila discovered she was pregnant again. This time there would be no blizzard, no desperate mountain delivery. She had a normal pregnancy and gave birth in her own bed with Dr. Pritchett in attendance and James holding her hand. The baby was a girl they named Sarah, with Lila's dark hair and James's gentle temperament. Isaac was the first visitor they allowed after the birth, and when Lila placed the tiny infant in his arms, she saw tears in his eyes. "She is beautiful," he said softly, cradling the baby with the same gentle competence he had shown with Thomas. "You are blessed with 2 beautiful children now. And they are blessed to have you in their lives," James said warmly, clapping Isaac on the shoulder. It was that same summer when things began to change for Isaac in an unexpected way. A widow named Esther Morrison moved to Twin Falls from Montana with her young daughter. Her husband had died in a mining accident, and she had come to Idaho to make a fresh start near her brother's family. She was a quiet, serious woman of about 30, with auburn hair and green eyes that held both sadness and determination. Lila noticed immediately that Isaac seemed interested in Esther, though he clearly did not realize it himself. He would ask casual questions about her when Esther's name came up in conversation, and Lila caught him watching the widow during church services with an expression of thoughtful assessment. Lila decided to play matchmaker, inviting both Isaac and Esther to various family dinners and gatherings, making sure they had opportunities to talk. At first the interactions were awkward, 2 reserved people who had both experienced loss and were cautious about opening their hearts again. But gradually, they began to relax around each other, finding common ground in their shared experiences and complementary temperaments. It was Isaac who finally made the first move, asking if he could call on Esther properly. She agreed, and their courtship began slowly and carefully. Isaac was terrified of rushing things or making mistakes, and Esther was equally wary after the trauma of losing her first husband. But they persevered, learning to trust each other and themselves. By the fall of 1887, Isaac asked Esther to marry him, and she said yes. The wedding was small and simple, held in the Twin Falls church with the Reynolds family standing as witnesses. When Isaac spoke his vows, his voice steady and sure, Lila felt tears of joy streaming down her face. This man who had been so broken and lost had found love again, had allowed himself to risk his heart despite his fears. Esther's 8-year-old daughter, Margaret, moved to Isaac's ranch with her mother, and suddenly, Isaac had the family he had longed for. Margaret was shy at first, uncertain about this tall, quiet man who was now her stepfather, but Isaac won her over with patient kindness and gentle humor. He taught her to ride and rope, skills her own father had never had the chance to teach her, and she began to blossom under his attention. The two families, Reynolds and Crawford, became deeply intertwined. Their ranches were so close that the children ran back and forth between them constantly. Thomas and Margaret became inseparable playmates despite their age difference, and baby Sarah was doted on by everyone. Holidays and special occasions were always celebrated together, and the adults would sit on porches in the evening sharing coffee and conversation, while the children played in the twilight. In 1889, Esther gave birth to a son, and Isaac finally had a biological child of his own. They named him Samuel Isaac Crawford, and when Isaac held his newborn son for the first time, Lila saw the healing of old wounds in his face. He had lost so much years ago, but life had given him a second chance, and he had been brave enough to take it. The years continued to flow past like a river, bringing both joys and challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle losses and good harvests, injuries and illnesses, and the normal trials of life. But through it all, the two families remained close, supporting each other through everything. Thomas grew into a strong, confident boy who loved nothing more than riding in the mountains with Uncle Isaac, learning to track and hunt and read the signs of weather and wildlife. Sarah proved to have her mother's green thumb and gentle spirit, always bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Margaret blossomed into a lovely and capable young woman who could outride and outrope most of the ranch hands. And little Samuel, who everyone called Sam, was a happy whirlwind of energy who kept his parents constantly on their toes. In 1892, Lila gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Daniel and Rose. Isaac and Esther's second child, a daughter named Grace, arrived in 1893. The ranch properties rang with the laughter and shouts of children, and both Isaac and James often commented that they had been blessed beyond measure. It was December of 1894, exactly 10 years after that fateful blizzard, when the families gathered at the Reynolds Ranch for a celebration. The children were putting on a play they had written and rehearsed, a dramatic and only somewhat accurate retelling of Thomas's birth during the storm. 10-year-old Thomas himself played Isaac, wearing an oversized hat and speaking in an exaggerated deep voice that had all the adults struggling not to laugh. After the performance, when the children had run off to play in the snow, the adults sat around the fireplace sharing memories and reflecting on the decade that had passed. "You ever think about that night?" James asked Isaac. "The blizzard." "All the time," Isaac admitted, his arm around Esther's shoulders. "It changed everything for me. I was so lost back then, so alone. And then I found your cabin and delivered Thomas, and somehow that set me on a completely different path." "You saved my life," Lila said softly. "You saved Thomas's life. Everything good that has happened since then is because you were there when we needed you most." "And you saved mine," Isaac countered. "Maybe not in the same dramatic way, but you and James pushed me to rejoin the world, to take a chance on having a real life again. You gave me back my future." Esther squeezed her husband's hand. "I am grateful for that blizzard too, then. Without it, I would never have found you." James raised his coffee cup. "To the blizzard of 1884 and to the family it brought together." They all raised their cups in agreement, and Lila felt a wave of contentment so strong it almost hurt. She looked around at these people she loved so much. Her husband, who had been her rock and partner for all these years. Her dear friend Isaac, who had literally brought her son into the world by lantern light. Esther, who had become like a sister to her. And all the beautiful children who filled their lives with noise and joy and purpose. The wind rattled the windows, reminding them that winter still held Idaho in its grip. But inside the house was warm and bright with firelight and fellowship. Outside, the snow fell gently, blanketing the world in white, peaceful now rather than threatening. Thomas came running in from the other room, his face flushed with excitement from playing. "Mama, Papa, Uncle Isaac, Aunt Esther, come see. We built a fort in the spare room." The adults laughed and let themselves be dragged away to admire the children's creation. And as Lila walked hand in hand with her son, she thought about how one terrifying night 10 years ago had set all of this in motion. She had been so frightened then, certain she would die alone in that mountain cabin. But Isaac had come through the storm like an answer to prayer, and together they had brought Thomas safely into the world. That single night had bound them together in ways that went beyond normal friendship or gratitude. It had created a family in the truest sense of the word, not defined by blood, but by shared experience and chosen love and mutual support. Isaac had started as a stranger, become a hero, then a friend, and finally a brother. His wife Esther had joined their circle seamlessly, and now all their children were growing up together, creating bonds that would last their entire lives. The years continued their steady march forward. The children grew, reached milestones, faced their own challenges and triumphs. Thomas eventually took over the day-to-day operations of the Reynolds Ranch, proving to have his father's business sense and his mother's compassion for the people who worked for them. Sarah married a young veterinarian and opened an animal hospital in Twin Falls. Daniel became a teacher, while Rose married into a ranching family and moved north. Margaret married a lawyer and moved to Boise but visited often. Sam took over Isaac's ranch when his father grew too old for the hard physical work, running it with the same careful competence Isaac had shown. Isaac and Esther celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1907, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Isaac was in his 50s now, his dark hair streaked with gray, his face more lined but his pale blue eyes still sharp and clear. He had lived a good life, far richer and fuller than he ever expected when he was a lonely mountain cowboy trapped by grief. James and Lila celebrated their 25th anniversary that same year, their love for each other as strong as ever. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, raised 5 children to adulthood, and built something lasting and good. And through all of it, Isaac had been there, the friend who was closer than a brother, the man who had helped bring their first child into the world during a blizzard on a mountain. It was a summer evening in 1908 when the two families gathered once more, this time for Thomas's wedding. He was marrying a lovely young woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and the celebration was held outdoors under a sky full of stars. 24-year-old Thomas stood tall and handsome in his best suit, his face full of joy as he spoke his vows, and Lila felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her firstborn son begin his own family. During the reception, Isaac found Lila standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching the dancing. He joined her quietly, and they stood together in comfortable silence for a moment. "Hard to believe that is the same baby I delivered during the blizzard," Isaac said finally. "He was so small then, barely 7 pounds. Now look at him." "I think about that night often," Lila admitted. "How terrified I was, how certain I was going to die, and then you appeared out of the storm like a miracle." "I was terrified too," Isaac confessed. I had helped with animal births plenty, but a human baby is something else entirely. I was praying the whole time that I would not make a mistake that cost you both your lives. But you did not. You were steady and calm and exactly what I needed." Lila turned to look at him fully. "Do you remember what I said to you that night right before Thomas was born?" "You said a lot of things," Isaac said with a slight smile. "Some of them quite colorful." Lila laughed. "Yes, well, I was in pain, but I also said that I trusted you. Do you remember that?" "I do." "I want you to know that I still trust you, more than almost anyone else in the world. You have been a constant in my life for 24 years, Isaac. A true friend, a second brother to my children, an honorary uncle to my grandchildren. I cannot imagine what my life would have been without you in it." Isaac's eyes were suspiciously bright. "The feeling is entirely mutual, Lila. You and James gave me back my life. You showed me that it was possible to love again, to be part of a family again. Everything good I have now is because you refused to let me stay isolated in my grief." They embraced then, a warm hug between old friends who had been through so much together. When they separated, they were both wiping away tears and laughing at their sentimentality. "Come on," Lila said, linking her arm through his. "Let us go join the dancing. Esther and James are probably wondering where we have gone." They walked back to the celebration together, and as the music played and the stars wheeled overhead, Lila felt profoundly grateful for the strange and beautiful path her life had taken. That terrifying night in December of 1884, with snow blocking every road for 40 miles and a mountain cowboy delivering her baby by lantern light, had seemed like a tragedy in the making. But it had actually been the beginning of something wonderful, a bond between families that had only grown stronger with the passing years. The music swelled, and James swept Lila into a dance while Isaac claimed Esther's hand. The two couples moved across the makeshift dance floor, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, and the summer night was full of joy and laughter and love. Thomas and his new bride cut their cake amid cheers and applause, beginning their own adventure together. And somewhere in the mountains to the north, snow still crowned the highest peaks even in summer, a reminder of that long-ago blizzard that had brought a lonely cowboy and a desperate mother together and changed both their lives forever. The snow had blocked every road that night, trapping them together, but it had also opened a path to healing and family, and a future neither of them could have imagined. As the years advanced and the children continued to grow and have families of their own, the story of Thomas's birth became family legend, told and retold at gatherings until every detail was burnished bright by repetition. The grandchildren would beg to hear it again. How great Uncle Isaac had ridden through a terrible blizzard and delivered their grandfather by lantern light in a remote mountain cabin. The story grew slightly more dramatic with each telling, the snow deeper, the danger greater, Isaac's heroism more pronounced. But the core truth remained unchanged. One man's courage and competence, combined with one woman's strength and determination, had brought new life into the world against all odds. And that single night had created ripples that spread outward through time, touching dozens of lives, creating a family bound not by blood alone, but by shared history and chosen love. Isaac Crawford lived to be 73 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1920, with Esther holding his hand, and his children gathered around his bed. His funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Twin Falls, all the lives he had touched over 40 years of being part of the community. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking movingly about the uncle who had literally brought him into the world and who had been a constant, steady presence throughout his entire life. Uncle Isaac once told me that the blizzard that trapped him with my mother was the best thing that ever happened to him, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, because it forced him to stop running from life and start living again. He said that delivering me showed him that new beginnings are always possible, no matter how much we have lost or how old our pain might be. He carried that lesson with him for the rest of his life, and he taught it to all of us who knew him. Uncle Isaac, you will be deeply missed, but your legacy lives on in all of us who loved you. Lila, now a silver-haired woman of 60, wept quietly in the front pew, supported by James on one side and Esther on the other. She had lost her dear friend, her brother in all but blood, but she was grateful for every moment they had shared. Isaac had given her son life with his own hands, and then he had enriched all their lives with his steady presence and quiet wisdom for decades. The funeral procession wound through Twin Falls to the cemetery on the hill, overlooking the valley. As they lowered Isaac's casket into the earth, Lila looked out over the landscape he had loved, the mountains rising blue and majestic in the distance. She thought about that frightened young cowboy who had appeared out of a blizzard 24 years ago, alone and grieving and convinced his life was over. And she thought about the man he had become, surrounded by family and friends, having built a life rich with love and meaning and purpose. "Thank you," she whispered into the wind. "Thank you for saving my life, for saving Thomas, for being exactly who we needed when we needed it most. Rest well, dear friend." Time continued its relentless forward motion as it always does. James passed away in 1925, dying at age 65 after a brief illness. Lila grieved deeply but found comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the solid legacy she and James had built together. She lived another 15 years, becoming the beloved matriarch of a large and sprawling family that included not just her own descendants but Isaac and Esther's as well, all of them intertwined and interwoven until it was impossible to say where one family ended and the other began. When Lila Reynolds died in 1940 at the age of 78, her funeral was even larger than Isaac's had been. She had touched countless lives through her kindness and generosity, her wisdom and compassion. But what people remembered most was the story of that blizzard night, the courage she had shown bringing her first child into the world with only a mountain stranger to help her. Thomas, now 56 years old and the patriarch of his own large family, stood at his mother's grave and remembered the story she had told him so many times. How the snow had blocked every road for 40 miles, trapping her alone in a mountain cabin. How a cowboy named Isaac Crawford had appeared like an answer to prayer. How he had delivered Thomas by lantern light while the blizzard raged outside. That night made everything else possible. Thomas said to his own grandchildren after the funeral, "If Uncle Isaac had not found Mama, I would not be here. None of you would be here." One act of courage and compassion during a blizzard changed the course of all our lives. The story passed down through generations, becoming a treasured piece of family history. Great-grandchildren who never knew Lila or Isaac still heard about the mountain cowboy who delivered a baby by lantern light, who then became part of the family he saved and helped create something beautiful and lasting. The ranches changed hands over the years, were divided and sold and developed. Twin Falls grew from a small frontier town into a proper city. The Wild West that had shaped Isaac and Lila's lives faded into history and legend. But the story remained, a reminder that courage and compassion in a single moment can echo through time in ways we never expect. And sometimes, when winter storms sweep down from the mountains and blanket Idaho in snow, the descendants of Lila Reynolds and Isaac Crawford tell the story again, keeping alive the memory of that December night in 1884 when a blizzard blocked every road for 40 miles, and a mountain cowboy delivered a baby by lantern light, and two families were born out of darkness and courage and hope. The love between those two families, forged in crisis and tempered by time, proved to be as enduring as the mountains themselves. It was not a romantic love story in the traditional sense, but something deeper and more complex, a chosen family built on gratitude and respect and genuine affection. Isaac and Lila had navigated complicated feelings with honesty and integrity, choosing to honor their commitments while acknowledging the unique bond between them. And in the end, both had lived full and happy lives, surrounded by love, having given and received far more than either could have dreamed during that desperate, terrifying night when fate and a blizzard brought them together. The snow that had blocked every road became, in retrospect, the path that led them both to exactly where they needed to be. Their story was one of survival and courage, of friendship and family, of second chances and new beginnings. It was a story about how a single night can change everything, how strangers can become family, and how love in all its forms, whether romantic or familial or the deep bond of friendship, can transform lives and create legacies that last for generations. And that, in the end, was the truest and best kind of love story of all.